"You are nothing, Miss Pruett, nothing at all beside your sister," Sir Rowland Craik said, loud enough that the nearest dancers turned their heads, and the Duke of Yardworth, standing unseen in the shadow of a marble pillar, felt his jaw set hard. He had come to the Harrowden ball only to satisfy his aunt, who had grown tiresome on the subject of his continued bachelorhood, and he had meant to stay an hour and no longer. Julian Vane, ninth Duke of Yardworth, did not care for ballrooms. He found them airless and full of the same painted ambition wherever he went. But the cruelty in Sir Rowland's voice had a way of carrying, and Julian found he could not look away from the young woman at whom it was aimed. She stood very straight beside a fluted column, a plain girl in a gown of dove gray that had plainly been let out and turned more than once, and she did not weep, though her hands trembled at her sides. Beside her, resplendent in rose silk, her sister laughed behind a fan, a golden, glittering creature the whole room seemed to bend toward, the way flowers bend toward a lamp. "I had thought to make you an offer," Sir Rowland went on, and there was pleasure in his mouth as he said it, the pleasure of a man who enjoys watching a small thing squirm. "Your father hinted you might be had cheaply, and I confess I nearly took the bait. But then I saw Miss Charlotte, and I ask you what man would choose the shadow when he might have the flame? You are nothing, my dear, a plain, portionless nothing. I shall pay my addresses to your sister, and you may go home and be grateful anyone noticed you at all." The plain girl lifted her chin. "Then I wish you both very happy," she said, and her voice did not break, though it cost her everything to keep it level. "You have told me plainly what I am worth to you, Sir Rowland. I shall not trouble you to say it twice." Julian had spent a great many years reading men, for a duke who wished to keep his fortune and his name intact must learn to read them quickly. He knew Rowland Craik for exactly what he was, a man deep in debt behind his fine coat, hunting a dowry, cruel to the weak because cruelty cost him nothing. And he knew, watching the gray-gowned girl hold herself together by main force of will, that he was looking at the only person of quality in the whole glittering room. He did not know her name yet, he meant to. He crossed the floor. He was aware, as he always was, of the ripple that went before him, the whispers, the sudden straightening of spines, the mother's hands closing on their daughter's arms. The Duke of Yardworth did not dance. The Duke of Yardworth had refused every hostess in 3 counties, and here he was, walking with unhurried purpose across the Harrowden ballroom while 100 eyes followed him and could not fathom where he was bound. He stopped before the gray-gowned girl. He bowed, not the slight, careless inclination he gave to duchesses, but a full, deliberate bow, the kind a man gives a queen. "Madam," he said, "I have not had the honor. Will you tell me your name?" She looked up at him, and he saw that her eyes were a clear and steady hazel, red-rimmed but dry, and that she was younger than her grave composure had made her seem. "Eleanor Pruett, your grace," she said, "though I cannot think why a man of your rank should wish to know it. You have heard, I think, what I am." "I heard a fool speak," Julian said, and he said it clearly so that Sir Rowland, standing not 3 feet distant and gone suddenly pale, should hear it too. "I have made rather a study of fools, Miss Pruett. It is a duke's chief occupation, and I have learned to know the sound of one at any distance." A hush had spread outward from them, now like a stone dropped in a pond. The music faltered as the players craned to see. Charlotte Pruett's fan had stilled against her lips. Her lovely face had gone slack with astonishment. "Your Grace," Sir Rowland began, recovering himself, oiling his voice into its most agreeable register, "I fear you have mistaken the matter. I was merely, that is, I meant no." "You meant a great deal," Julian said, without turning to look at him, "and you meant it loudly before this entire company, so I think we need not pretend otherwise." Now he did turn, and he fixed the baronet with the flat dark gaze that had made older and braver men than Rowland Craik lose the thread of their sentences. "You said this lady was worth nothing. I find I disagree. I find I disagree so entirely that I should like the whole room to hear me do it." He offered Eleanor his arm. "Miss Pruett," he said, "will you do me the honor of dancing this next with me?" For a long moment she did not move, and Julian understood that she was afraid that this too was a cruelty, a grander and colder joke than Sir Rowland's, that the great Duke of Yardworth had crossed the room merely to raise her up so that her fall might amuse him the more. He had earned no better opinion of himself. He knew what men said of him. Cold, proud, a man who used his rank as a wall. "I do not mock you," he said low for her alone. "I have never in my life crossed a ballroom for anyone. I am crossing it now for you. Let them look, let them wonder. Give me your hand, Miss Prouette, and we shall give them something worth wondering at." And a leaner Prouette, who had been told she was nothing not 5 minutes before, laid her trembling hand upon the arm of a duke, and let him lead her out onto the floor. The players, at a sharp glance from Julian, took up a waltz. He was aware, as he turned her, of the whole assembly watching, of Sir Rowland's ashen face, of Charlotte's parted lips, of the dowagers with their heads together like a rookery. He did not care. He found, to his own considerable surprise, that he cared for nothing at all beyond the woman in his arms, who danced correctly and stiffly at first, holding herself apart, waiting still for the trick. "You need not be afraid of me," he said. "They all say you are very cold, your grace." "They are right," Julian said. "I have been cold a long while. I found it a useful thing to be. A cold man is not deceived, not flattered, not made a fool of by pretty faces who want his name and nothing else." He looked down at her. "I have stood at the edge of 100 rooms like this one, Miss Prouette, and I have watched them all, the flames, as your gallant baronet would have it, flatter and preen and angle for advantage. And I have thought to myself, there is not one person here I should cross the floor to know. Tonight I heard a man call a woman nothing, and I watched that woman answer him with more grace than he will possess if he lives to be 100, and I found my feet moving before I had quite decided to move them." Something in her posture eased by a fraction. "You are very strange for a duke," she said. "So I have been told." The corner of his mouth moved, which was as near as Julian Vane came to smiling in public. "Tell me, Miss Prouette, the sister, Charlotte, you do not hate her?" Elinor's brow drew together, surprised. "No, why should I? She is not unkind, only accustomed to being looked at, as I am accustomed to being overlooked. We are what the world made us. She is not to blame for having a face people admire, any more than I am to blame for having one they do not trouble to." "There," Julian said, "that is the thing I meant. A lesser woman would hate her. You pity her instead, and you are right to, for she will marry a man like Craik and spend her life discovering by inches what he is. You will not." He guided her through the turn. "What did you mean to do, Miss Prouette, before I so rudely interrupted your evening? What did you want for yourself?" The question seemed to catch her off her guard, as though no one had ever thought to ask it. "I had a grey tan in Wiltshire," she said slowly, "who left me a very little money, not enough to tempt a man like Sir Rowland, as you have heard, but enough, I had hoped, to take a small cottage and keep hens and grow things and be of use to the parish. I had made my peace with it. A quiet life, unmarried, but my own. I did not come here tonight to catch a husband. My father made me come. I told him no one would look at me." She glanced up. "I was wrong, it seems, in that one particular." "You were wrong in a great many particulars," Julian said, "chief among them the belief that a quiet life alone was the best a woman of your worth might hope for. But I will not press you tonight. I have appended your evening enough." The music was drawing toward its close. "I will ask you one thing only. May I call upon you, at your father's house, in the proper way, with my card and my carriage and all the tedious ceremony the thing requires? I should like to know you, Elinor Prouette. I have not wished to know anyone in a very long time." She studied his face with that same clear, unflinching gaze that had first drawn him across the room, searching it for mockery and finding none. "You may call," she said. "Though I warn you, your grace, my father will make a great deal of it, and the whole county will talk, and by Sunday they will have us married." "Let them," Julian said. "For once in my life I find I do not mind what the county says." He called the next day, and the day after that. He came in his plain traveling coat with no ceremony at all in the end, and he sat in the modest parlor of the Prouette house and let Elinor pour his tea, and he found her company the first thing in years that did not weary him. She had read a great deal in her overlooked corners. She had opinions, quietly held and firmly kept, and she did not surrender them to flatter him, and she laughed when at last she trusted him enough to laugh with a low, surprised warmth, as though laughter were a thing she had been saving up. Her father, who had spent Eleanor's whole life apologizing for her to anyone who would listen, now discovered that his plain daughter had captivated the greatest man in 3 counties, and began at once to boast of her, as though her merit had been his own doing all along. Charlotte, to her credit, was glad, genuinely glad, and Sir Rowland Craik, who had indeed paid his addresses to the beautiful sister, discovered that a baronet deep in debt is not so tempting a prospect once a duke has publicly named the whole family worth knowing. Charlotte refused him. She married, a year later, a kind and unremarkable curate she loved, and was the happier for it, and never regretted the flame she had once been. Julian Vane asked Eleanor Prewett to be his wife in the garden of her father's house, among the very hens and herbs she had once thought would be the whole of her portion in life. "I have nothing to offer you that you value," he said, and he found to his own astonishment that his voice was not quite steady. "You wanted a quiet life, and I am a duke, and there is nothing quiet about it. There will be a great house and a great name and a great deal of tedious society that will stare at you and whisper. I can promise you only this, that I heard a man call you nothing, and I knew in that instant, before I knew your name, that I had never in my life seen anyone worth more. I would spend the rest of my days making certain you never doubt it. Marry me, Eleanor. Let me be the one who chose you, out of the whole glittering room, and went on choosing you every day after." Eleanor Prewett, who had schooled herself for 29 years to expect nothing and to be grateful for less, looked up at the cold, proud, feared Duke of Yardworth, who was neither cold nor proud with her, and found that her own composure, which had held against Sir Rowland Craik before all the world, would not hold against tenderness. "You are quite certain," she said, and her voice broke at last, "that you have not mistaken the shadow for the flame." "I have never been so certain of anything," Julian said. "The flame flatters and preens and dies down to ash by morning. You, Eleanor, you are the steady light a man reads by all his life. I knew at the moment you would not weep for a fool. Say yes. Let them all look, and let them all learn what you are worth." "Yes," she said. "Yes, Julian, though the county will be insufferable." "The county," said the Duke of Yardworth, drawing the woman the world had called nothing into his arms at last, "may say precisely what it likes. It has been wrong about you from the beginning. I intend to spend my life proving it so." They were married that autumn at Yardworth, in the great chapel of his ancestors, and the same glittering company that had watched a baronet name her worthless stood now, and watched a duke name her his duchess, and not one of them dared to whisper that she was plain. She did not become beautiful in the manner the ballrooms prized. She became something the ballrooms had never learned to see: a woman entirely at peace, loved without condition, chosen not for her face nor her fortune but for the steady, unshowy worth of her, honored before all the world by the one man who had troubled to look. And when, in later years, someone would foolishly remark within her hearing that they could not think what the great Duke of Yardworth had seen in so plain a wife, Julian would set down whatever was in his hand, and cross whatever room he was in, exactly as he had crossed the first, and take his duchess's hand before them all. "I saw," he would say, "the only thing in the room worth crossing a floor for. I have never once regretted the walk.